Lesson 2, creating an entity relationship diagram. Call it ERD. My name is Gerard Balekaki. This is how the lesson is laid out. This lesson is laid out in this following outline. ERD process. We have drawing ERD and interpretation, where we approach this in two cases. The first case is looking at the business diagram, translating them into ERD. And then the second case is about looking at the ERD, translating into business rules. And lastly, we will look at reduction of ERD to relational schemas. Basically, we're going to present relational schemas from ERDs. The process follows 5 main steps. The first step being creating a detailed narrative. We pick this from the business environment, where we identify the business rules, and that takes us to the second step. Look at the business rules as a statement that imposes some sort of constraint on a specific aspect of a database. Could be on an entity or relationship. The third step, where we use the business rules to create small ERDs, and these small ERDs, basically we combine them in the fourth step to come up with a single ERD. And lastly, we review and revise the ERD in the fifth step. You can look at the details of the diagram in that source. The first case, looking at the banking database. And this is a business narrative. So these are rules that we need to follow when we are creating an ERD. You can see the two texts is exactly the same. It's just that on the text on the right-hand side is clearly labeled and listed out easily. So these two texts is just the same text. The second step, which was identifying a business rules. The first business rule reads, a customer can have at least 2 accounts, and customers must provide their name, address, and phone number. When you look at this small ERD covering business rule 1 and 2, so for 1, we actually see it's pointing out customer and accounts. And you see that they said a customer, remember we test with 1, a customer has, at least 2, or can have at least 2. So at least 2 is minimum, and asterisk stands for many or maximum. Accounts. When we come from the other side, this says that an account can belong to only 1 customer. So test 1. 1 account belongs to or can belong to 1 and only 1 customer. So 1.1 near customer is basically representing this statement of only 1 customer. And then, of course, they point out the attributes in each of these diagrams. So the attributes in the accounts are type, which basically can be a savings account or a checking account. And then the balance. And you can see them right here. The account type, the balance, all included here. And then I'll explain how customer ID ends up here in a few seconds. And you can see that the attributes in customer are name, address, and phone number. We also include the name, which you call customer name, the address, and the phone right over there. When we're designing, we have to take care of the fundamentals of moving keys. So you can see that the maximum is a 1 here, and the maximum here is a many. You find that we say that this stands for cardinality. The first one stands for participation. So the cardinality here is 1, and then the cardinalities here is asterisk, which stands for many. We said we take this 1 and we take this many, and then it gives us our type of relationship. And then the type of relationship in between customer and account is a 1 to many. And because this is the many side, we find that the 1 side primary key moves into the many side. So we are going to take that as a fundamental. Every time you see a many side, it needs to accommodate a primary key, which is now a foreign key in that table from the linking table. Let's go to the second business. So you can see that business rule 1 and business rule 2 are clearly catered for in our small ERD. Business Rule 3, it reads that the transaction must be associated with a specific account. A transaction, remember we always test with one. So it could be a transaction, it could be one transaction, it could be each transaction, it could be a specific transaction, it's all one. So a transaction must be associated with specific account. So a transaction, the associated with is right here. 1.1 is generally means one account or a specific account. So this statement is catered for. Let's look at the other side. A account may have several transactions. So account test one account could be one account, could be each account, could be a specific account, can have, you can always point out whether it's mandatory. Okay, so this statement is option. An account may. So we indicate it as this. May is a 0. Okay, and remember 1 is mandatory. So this we have may have several. Okay, so we make sure that the first participation is 0. Several is many transactions. Let's look at business rule 4. A business rule 4 reads as a transaction is made at one branch. So let's look at it in this. One transaction is made at one branch because this is generally as one. One and only one could be specific, exactly one. They all mean the same thing. But in the notation, we label them as 1.1 branch. Let's look at the other. However, a branch makes many transactions. A branch test always with one. It could be a specific branch, it could be one branch, it could be a branch. Makes several. So this statement, you see this statement, we don't have a may. So it's not option. We have a one, okay? And this stands for many. Or generally someone terms it as many. So this transaction, a branch makes many transactions per day is always represented as a 1.that. Business rule 5, a transaction must have a date. Do we have a date? Yes, we have a date. A transaction must have an amount. We have an amount right over there. And also now, yes, we have account number and we have the branch ID. So how does this two come about? Let's recall the fundamental of moving keys. We talked about the type of relationship. First, identify the type of relationship in this relationship. So we look at the second digit, which is the cardinality, which is the maximum. So when we look at this side, this is a 1 and this is a many. Okay, so we can say this type of relationship is a 1 to many. And we say that we move the primary key of a one side into the many. That is why we end up with the branch ID. The 6th business rule that reads that employees can work at most one branch. At most means the most is 1. Okay, so at most means it could be 0, but should not exceed 1. Should be 0 or 1. Okay, so let's see if this is represented. So always test with 1. An employee, a specific employee, can work or works at most one branch. Or you can literally write it out as 0 or 1 branch. Okay. And then coming from the other side, and a branch employs many employees. When you look at this statement, we don't have any option right there. It's not an optional statement. So you find that we say that a branch employees 1 ... asterisk, which stands for many. And of course, again, let's identify the type of relationship. The type of relationship is identified by looking at the cardinality. The cardinality is the second digit in the notation. Look, we have near the branch, the cardinality is the 1, and then the cardinality near the employee is asterisk. So we can say this is a 1 to many. Let's pick the primary key or from the one side and move it into the many side. And that is why this exists right over here. And of course, they are telling us that the employee must have the name and the position in the bank. So the name, position, and of course, this comes from the fundamental of moving keys. Each entity must have an identifier to uniquely identify a record in each of the entities, and that is the primary key. So you can find that we have employee ID, a branch ID, and also all the IDs in the tables we've just mentioned about. So the next step is combine all these small ERDs into one ERD, and you can see right over there. So the first ERD we talked about, customer and accounts, is right over there. You can look at the multiplicities are all well defined. You can look at the names of relationships. All the primary keys and foreign keys are clearly labeled. You can see them right over there. The same applies to the second small ERD, the third, and the fourth. When we apply this, when we combine this, let's move one by one. Let's look at the first ERD, small ERD. We moved it right over here. Everything remains the same. Okay, let's look at the second one. The second one, of course, it combines account and transaction. But you see right over here that we already have account. So it's basically moving this line up over here and connect it with transaction. And everything else remains the same. Everything that we labeled in the small ERD remains the same. Let's look at transaction and branch. We already have a transaction entity. We just introduced the branch and keep everything the same. Keep the directional arrows the same. Keep the multiplicity the same. Keep the primary key and the foreign keys and the other attributes the same. Lastly, you can see employee and branch. This is almost like literally just moved and planted right over here, and everything is the same. So when you look at this combined ERD, basically represent all those small ERDs that we've just talked about. When you're given business rules and you are required to draw in the ERD, this would be a solution. So each of these business rules that are listed on the left-hand side are basically represented in an ER diagram on my right-hand side. You can point out any business rule and follow it. For example, business rule 4, a transaction is made at a branch. We can see it right over here. One transaction is made at one branch. However, a branch makes many transactions. A branch makes many transactions. Translated this. You may also be required to use an ERD to represent the relation schemas. And this is our next step, which is basically helps us to prepare for our physical implementation. So we use the relational schemas to implement the database because you can implement with diagrams. The relational schemas right on my left-hand side are exactly translated from each and every entity that you see right over here. So when you look at customers, the customer, we start out by labeling the name of the entity, which is a customer, and then you list all the attributes, okay, including primary keys and foreign keys. So the only thing here is the primary key needs to be underlined. So you can say customer, customer ID, we have customer name, we have address, and then we have a phone number. The same applies to the second entity, accounts. Write out the name of the entity, and then make sure you identify the primary key and make it underlined, and then you can label all the other existing attributes, including foreign key. And you can see that a foreign key here, customer ID, is also labeled as the last in our relation schema. And the same applies to transactions. You can see that the primary key is underlined, and then all the other attributes are listed. And you can see we have two foreign keys, which is account number and the branch ID. And you can still revise. Remember, we're supposed to revise. We want to see whether we did the right moving. So look at the type of relationship. The relationship here is one to many. So you can see that the primary key of the accounts ended up in here. Let's look at this side. This is a one to many. You find that the primary key here ended up here in the transaction. And now we can say that our diagram is really up to the standard. And lastly, employees. Branch also does the same. Label out the branch attributes. which is branch ID, branch name, and the location, branch ID being the primary key and needs to be underlined in the relational schema. Employee would also be represented in the relational schema as employee, which is the name of the entity, employee ID, which represent the primary key. We have employee name, we have position, and branch ID as a foreign key. Case 2, we want to look at a scenario whereby we are given an ERD and we are supposed to write out the business rule. And so the first business rule basically would be like one customer, a customer, or each customer, a specific customer, always tests with one, places one or more orders. So it's right here. One customer places multiple, or you literally write it out the way you see it in the notation, one or more. We use or and not and. You can't say one and more. So you can see it should be one or more orders. Okay, let's look at the other side, because always remember it's bidirectional. So let's come up this side. For a relationship to be complete, or for a business rule to be complete, we have to test it out in both directions. You can start with each or one order, or an order is associated with only one, because these translations are generally one, or literally write it out as one and only one. Now for one and only one, this you can use one. You can use and, not or. So you can say one and only one for this kind of notation. So that's how you write the first business rule. Let's look at the second business rule, which says customer stores customer ID, name of the customer, phone, and email as attributes. You find that we have also accommodated this in here. Customer stores customer ID. We have customer ID, name of customer, which is called customer name. We have an email, and we have the phone right over here. Okay, as attributes. We have the third business rule, which we also say the order has order ID, date of order. We have the total amount as attributes. When you look at order, we have the order ID, we have the order date, we have the total amount, and now something comes in, and we all know how this comes about. Look at the type of relationship, a one to many, a one size moves into this. Business rule number 4, each order can include multiple products. Let's see if this statement is represented. Each order, one order can include multiple. This generally can be written out as many, multiple, or literally write it out as one or more products. Let's come back. Each product can be part of multiple orders. Each product can be part of, you can include a directional arrow here and give it a name, can be part of one or many or multiple, okay? Multiple orders. When you look at the cardinality, which is second notation, this literally means that this is a many to many. I want you to understand that at this point, a many to many can be represented in the conceptual, but not at the logical level. We will deal with that in a few slides. Business rule number 5. Product has product ID, name of product, and price. Let's see if this is catered for. So product must have product ID, product name, price. You know how this comes about. Product has product ID, product name, and price. This comes from a category. Business rule 6. Each product belongs to a specific category, and the category can have multiple products. Each product, one product, belongs to a specific, this can be specific, or literally write it out as one and only one. Here we can use the and, one and only one category. And if you're coming from the other side, we say a category is a one, can add a directional arrow here, label it that can have multiple products, or literally say one or many products. Category consists of category ID, name, and description as fields. So you can see category ID, we have name, category name, and we have description. Now we want to go back here. So the question may arise there, where are our foreign keys? Where are they moving? That is going to be our next step. And our next step is how to deal with the many-to-many scenario. This scenario is not expected at our logical design, and we are going to see how we can deal with it. So how do we deal with the many-to-many relationship? We have identified a many-to-many relationship as our business rule number 4 that says that each order can include multiple products and each product can be part of multiple. This is a many-to-many by virtue of looking at the second cardinality, and this is not acceptable in our design going forward. So the approach is we introduce a bridge entity. This bridge entity is going to break the chain, the many-to-many chain, into a one-to-many type of relationship. And the other use of the bridge entity is also going to store our foreign keys. And that will answer our previous question, where do the foreign keys go in our many-to-many? So the foreign key are also going to be our primary keys, okay? So our primary key in the bridge entity is basically going to be a combination of this. It's going to be part of the one table and then the other table. So both these linking tables must contribute their primary key as a combination of our composite key. Or you can introduce a totally new surrogate key. And this is basically for design purposes. It has nothing to do with the customer order database. It could be any dummy a key that has only one purpose of identifying records uniquely in an entity. Let's look at exactly how this happened in a diagram. So this is what we call a bridge entity. You can see that the link between the order and the product was channeled to a new product, a new entity, which we call the product order. Now, why are we calling the product order? Because this is a bridge entity that is combining two many-to-many entities. You can find a suitable description of the table, but for now, for design purposes, just call the new table just a combination of two entity names. So for these purposes, let's concentrate on what it does. The bridge entity, which we call the product order, stores the order ID and the product ID. Now, I want you to concentrate on these two. So these two combine to form a primary key. The two attributes that are foreign key in here combine to form a primary key. So we have an order ID plus the product ID, that's the primary key in this table. And then each of them become a foreign key because this is not their primary table. So you can see that order ID, it contributes as a primary key, but it's also a foreign key. The same applies to product ID. It's a foreign key because that's not a primary table, and also it contributes as a primary key. So the primary key must be a combination. It cannot be just one. Alternatively, for design purposes, if you don't want to use the combination of each of the primary keys from linking tables, you can introduce a surrogate key and you can just call it ID or POID, product order ID. Surrogate is going to be auto-generated only to be used for identification purposes. Now, let's go to the cardinality. Remember, we had a many-to-many. How does it come to a one-to-many? The notation near the bridging table must be the many side, must be comprising the many side. And then the other side must be the one side. So this is how the many-to-many breaks down into a one-to-many. And like you say, this is generally translated as one, and this is generally translated as many. This is generally translated as one, and this is generally translated as many. And one-to-many is what we widely implement in our implementation. So how does our relation schema look like? Our relation schema is basically a direct translation of our table schemas into this format right over here. So you can look at the customer, which is the customer name, write it out, customer, identify the primary key, make it underline, and list all the other attributes that you see and you can see we have the customer name, we have the email, and we have the phone. Let's look at the order. The same thing. Write out the name of the table or the name of the entity, and then write the primary key. We always have to first write the primary key first, and then write the other attributes. You find that customer ID is a foreign key right over here, so it must be included. You don't need to underline it. We only underline the foreign key, the primary key rather. Product order. So product order is a new entity right there. So it should also be created as a new entity or table. And what's the primary key right over there? The primary key is a combination of these two. So that's why you see the primary key is underlined, both of them. Okay. But remember, in the bridge entity, we can have other attributes that may be suitable. Okay. For example, in this relationship, I may be interested in looking at the quantity of products ordered. So that would be suitable to be included in here because it makes use of the order information and makes use of the products information. So you can have other attributes or what we call secondary attributes on top of these special attributes that form a primary key. And of course, the product schema would look like this. You can see everything is labeled. The name of the entity is right over here, products. The product ID is right there and underlined as a primary key. We have the product name, and then we have the price, and then category. You can see right over there. You don't need to do anything on the foreign key. Just label it as any other key. When you look at the category, the name of the category is labeled. Please don't forget the parenthesis. The category name, the category ID as a primary key, the category name, and then the description. You can see it's all included. So we're not missing out anything. So a question might be, given the business rule, present an ERD. The other question could be, given the ERD, present the business rule. The other question could be, given the ERD, present the relation schema. So this is all what this lesson is about. Refer to the activity section where you're going to find the activities 2.2 to 2.5, and these activities are going to enrich your understanding on how best to create ERDs in our relational database design. And just the summary, basically we talked about everything, and our next lesson is going to be about the extended ERD, where we looked at advanced features, more details in the diagram, because that's the whole point of using diagrams to literally represent our rules.